What's at stake in this election is, will we allow big business to run this city, or will working people continue to have a voice in City Hall?
This isn't an ordinary political election. It's a vote to hold a politician, Councilmember Sawant, accountable and show that the rule of law applies to everyone, even politicians.
Well, that's Councilmember Charleena Sawant facing a recall election. This week, we're going to learn a lot more about that. Also, you heard from Henry Bridger II, the leader of the campaign to take her out of office. A historic vote coming up this week, the first time a city council member has ever faced a recall vote in Seattle, the eyes of the nation on that race. Plus, we're keeping track of some developments on what's happening with the Charleena Lyles decision and your city light bill and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. Brian Callanan here with you. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. And joining me is none other than Kevin Schofield with Seattle City Council Insight. And Kevin, we talked about this last week. Kevin is ending Seattle City Council Insight at the end of the year. Very sad news. But I just wanted to know, what are you going to do with your time if you're not watching 19 hours of council meetings every day? You're going to write a sequel to War and Peace, or what's the plan, man?
That's a really good question. The sequel to War and Peace is a tempting thing, or I might just get back to baking again.
Okay, all right. Hey, man,
I made jam last night. I made a whole new batch of raspberry jam last night. I need some scones to go with that. So,
that's right. Okay.
Otherwise,
all right.
Jam's going to go to waste.
Things to do. All right. Well, good to know. Thank you for that, Kevin. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast, your favorite coffee stand on the first floor of City Hall. So please do support them, other small businesses as well. Thanks to owners John and Riley for supporting our show. Thanks also to our patrons. We just had Rod join us over this past week. Thank you very much, Rod, for making that happen. And wow, intern Rob, a huge fan of the show, he bumped up his pledge significantly this week, and he's a member of our mug club, meaning at the $10 level or more on Patreon. We have sent him a beautiful mug just like this one. Kevin's got one too. There you go, my man. And so this is what's going on. He sent us so many wonderful photos in the past. The mug shot from Rob this week, a Lego holiday scene at the North Pole with our mug there, and in the mug, a little note with a heart for Kevin. Rob, thank you so much. This is the stuff, I got to say. So beautiful to see. I know Kevin appreciates it. I know I do too. Thank you, Rob, for that. Thank you for your patronage. Thanks to all of our patrons out there. If you want to become a patron, check out Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon and support the show. A special thanks to Converge Media, of course. The video version of our podcast runs on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, we're off and rolling with right here, right now. Well, here we go. Crunch time in the Charleena Sawant recall. December 7th is the date ballots are due for voters in District 3. And Kevin, we have seen headlines from around the country on this race, but it really does come down to organization on the street. I saw King 5 covering a very interesting strategy for the pro-Sawant camp. Teams in pop-up tents actually printing out provisional ballots, talking to people, cross-referencing registration information, and making sure people vote. King 5 recording, this is all legal here. And Kevin, as much as we have heard from disgruntled people on the recall side, I think it's going to be tough to match this raw on-the-street organizational power of the Sawant Solidarity Campaign. What do you think?
I think it's hard to say. You remember, this is a mail-in ballot campaign, right? Mm-hmm. I've been watching the returns so far, and there was, I can tell you what it looks like so far is that immediately there's a setup, there's a big spike immediately, more than usual, where a whole bunch of people just immediately return their ballots.
They voted early,
and then, and then since then, it's pretty closely followed the pattern that it has in past elections, including just last month's November general election, right?
Yes.
So, not other than that first day spike, the numbers just don't really look that different. As of late last week, 33% participation so far, which is high. Again, there was that initial sort of spike, which is sort of carried forward.
Yeah.
And we're just going to have to see where it ends up. I can also tell you, at this point, we don't have. We have a little bit of age demographic information, but what we don't have right now is, because the 2020 census sort of calculations isn't done yet, we don't really know kind of how the age brackets break out just in terms of the demographics of District 3. But we do know is that there are about 7,600 people age 65 or older living in District 3.
Okay.
So far, over 6,500 of them have voted in this.
Wow.
So the age 65 and older voting block has definitely come through early, as they tend to do in this
mm-hmm.
election. So that's that. Given past trends, probably doesn't look great for Sawant.
Yeah.
But she's, as you mentioned, she's got a really good get out the vote machine, and
she's beaten
and they've been
before,
out registering new voters.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if those new voters that they register actually turn out to vote or not. We'll see about that. And I think we're all going to be watching super carefully.
Oh, you better believe
coming
it.
Week.
Yeah, and the thing that still blows me away about this is the amount of money being spent on a one-issue race in a district of 75,000 people here. But really, the eyes of the nation are on this. Close to $1 million from each side here. You got Recall Sawant, and to a smaller extent, a group called A Better Seattle funding the recall side here. The Shama Solidarity Campaign supporting the council member. We have talked before about how the majority of the dollars in support of Sawant are coming from outside the city. But when you break down the number of supporters who have actually made a contribution, she has more than double the donors in District 3 compared to the recall campaign. Do you think that's going to make a difference?
Certainly, it's made a difference in terms of just looking at what they do in the district, the advertising they've been doing, the flyers on the telephone poles and the lawn signs and advertising and all of that. That's certainly been a lot more parity because of that. As you mentioned, a ton of money gone in, about $950,000 on either side. At this point, so $1.9 million. That's way more than was spent on either the two city council races. In the general, it's about half of what was spent on the mayor's race last month, which we know is always sort of the big local race. So just an enormous amount of money has gone into this. Again, it's got pretty robust voter participation, which is interesting because the pro Sawant campaign has repeatedly said that that this whole election was staged in time as a form of voter suppression, and it sure doesn't look like it's turning out that way, right?
No, it really doesn't. It really doesn't.
The voters are definitely turning out for this.
I guess just final thought on this one. I think this really comes down to our voters looking at these facts here that are behind this recall. And Councilmember Sawant, for her part, really hasn't disputed any of these facts in terms of opening up the city hall to protesters coming in or whatever else, in terms of being involved in the Tax Amazon campaign with her office. She's pushed back a little bit on that piece of leading the actual march that went to Jenny Durkin's house. She was there for certain, but it's that whole balance between, are you looking at those facts, or is this somehow the right wing trying to take down a progressive leader? I feel like that's the battle that's going on in people's heads right now.
Well, and the reality is it's both, right? It is a set of facts where she has repeatedly broken the law, right? And then there are a set of people who are going to vote to recall her because they don't like her politics, or they don't like her approach, or they don't like her combative style. Sure. And there's no way to manage how people vote. And on the flip side, that's true as well. Again, people who vote to defeat the recall because they support her progressive politics.
Absolutely.
Or they disagree with whether she's broken the law or not, or whether they're trivial law breaking, right? And there are people who will vote to support her because they like her combative style. Right. So it is. I mean, let's just be honest. It is all of that, right? That all goes into that, and that's all going to factor into how people decide to vote and decide whether to vote or not. Do they care enough about this on either side that they actually want to take the time to vote?
Fascinating race ahead. Thank you for that, Kevin. I want to move on to some more news here in terms of catching up with what the council's been doing. Just keeping track of a few items on the council's agenda this week. I'm looking at two things, Kevin. Extending the moratorium on mobile home parks. Here we go again. Another 6 months. The council working out some final details there. Also transferring some money into the City Light Stabilization Fund to try to avoid a bunch of rate changes for customers in the coming year. We've covered both these stories quite a bit over the past couple of weeks here, Kevin. Just a quick take on both of them, just to try to keep people up to date.
Sure. Mobile home parks legislation, the city council and the city government think that they're super close to finally having an overlay zoning district for these two mobile home parks in North Seattle that involved actually settling, a dispute with one of the two mobile home park owners.
Right.
Got that done, but they think it's going to take probably till February to get it done. So they have to just
they got to extend that moratorium. Okay.
So they just have to extend the moratorium. They really believe this is the last time, and this is like the fifth time they've done it. And they think that's the end of it. Finally.
Good to know.
City Light Rate Stabilization Fund. So the Rate Stabilization Fund has a lot to do. It basically has to do with one set of revenues for Seattle City Light, which is their wholesale revenues.
Okay, right.
They do retail revenues to you and me and the rest of the retail customers here in the greater Seattle area. And then when they have excess power, which they often do, they, particularly this year when the rivers are running high, right? They're generating tons of hydropower.
Yes, right.
Then they sell that on the wholesale market. But that depends on how much wholesale, excess power they have to be able to sell, and it depends on what the prices are in the market, because they're selling stuff on the open market where the price fluctuates all the time. So they really don't know, ahead of. They can guess what they think the aggregate revenue is going to be over the year, but they don't really know for sure, right?
Right.
So they have a rate stabilization fund. That basically allows them to, because they basically have to break even every year. Right. And they guess on the wholesale revenues. They build out a whole sort of expense profile, and then the gap between the wholesale revenues and their total expenses for the year, they then back calculate how much they need to charge you and me.
That's right.
This, right. So this rate stabilization fund is a way for them to supplement the wholesale revenues. Right. So that it doesn't fluctuate year to year. And that way, what they have to charge us for retail revenues doesn't have to fluctuate to make up for it.
Doesn't trigger that rate increase. Got it.
So the rate stabilization fund, they've actually put some money in it. It got drawn down a little bit last year, with all the COVID craziness and revenues instability and all that. And so they're putting a bit more money into it, but they're also going in and they're changing the rules a little bit, right? Because the rules, the official rules for this are really tight as to sort of, if it's in this tight margin, you have, or it falls this much below, then you have to bump it up this much. If it falls this much below, then you have to bump up our rates even more, just until it comes back into kind of the natural range again. And it means that they have to change those rates a lot because of that. So now they're and there's about 100. The rules require them to have about $100 million. And if they have less than that, then they have to increase their rates to get it back up to $100 million. $100 million is a lot, right? And they've never gotten really ever close to needing to spend $100 million. So they're looking at whether they need to, whether they can bump that down a little bit, and then change sort of the segments.
Those different trigger points.
Tell them how much more they need to bump up the revenues to build back up that reservoir of money again, right? So there's a bunch of fidgeting around that they've been thinking about for a couple of years. It looks like they're finally going to do this year round.
Good to hear. And the bottom line is here, the council really working to make sure that our rates stay stable as much as they can as we try to emerge from the pandemic. So thanks for breaking that down, Kevin. All right, up next, the Charleena Lyles case, a wrongful death settlement for the city of Seattle, a decision 4 years in the making. We're going to discuss what happened and what's next on Now Hear This. Some important news from last week. The city of Seattle reached a settlement, $3.5 million, with the family of Charleena Lyles. She was a woman who called to report a burglary to 911 in June of 2017. She ended up drawing a knife when officers arrived and was subsequently killed by police. Now, the attorney for the family spoke about this settlement last week, and specifically about how difficult this case was in light of the mental health issues Charleena Lyles was going through.
It's been a brutal case in many ways. It's been a very difficult case because of what happened and the status of the law. And the law is not friendly to people that are having mental health crises.
Kevin, this really was a difficult case in so many different ways. To start, I want your thoughts on what the attorney we just heard from was saying right there, Karen Kohler. She made this point that this was a police response to a mental health crisis, and that combination really turned out to be deadly here. Your reaction to that?
Yeah, and this is something that came up, just a couple of weeks ago, and probably something that actually really led to the settlement here. Appeals court, ruled that the case can go forward to a jury.
Yeah, right.
It had been dismissed at a lower level.
That's right.
And that had been appealed, and the appeals court overturned that. Right. So it was going to go in front of a jury.
Yeah.
And one of the things that the appeals court, mentioned and had come up in, at the district court level is the police officers. The police had been called to Charleena Lyles' apartment before.
That's right.
And had noted in the previous records for that address that, an occupant had mental health issues.
Yeah.
So they were aware going into her apartment that she was potentially somebody who could be exhibiting mental health issues.
That's right.
Right. And how that factors into their decision when she pulled a knife to shoot her is very complicated. There's contextual things around where they were in the room. It appears that one of the officers was sort of backed into her little kitchen area in the apartment and may not have room to go back to sort of move and get distance away, and it was also fairly cramped. But on the other side, they were aware. And so it raises all sorts of legitimate questions about, did they take the appropriate precautions?
They didn't have tasers on them. There was a lot going on here.
They didn't have tasers on them. There are questions about, they had batons. Was there enough room and time for them to use those? So, in front of a jury, all those issues were going to come up.
Right.
And they're absolutely legitimate questions to ask about, were those officers, when they went in, knowing that this was a place with an occupant who had mental health issues, were they prepared in all the right ways to handle any, situations that came up in appropriate manners, right? Jury was going to have to wrestle with all of that.
Right.
And the city, after, a prolonged litigation already just at this point, and all these issues still ahead of them, decided to settle it, right?
Yeah, a 13-hour negotiation. It sounds like that really went on for a while, but keep going.
So we haven't seen the settlement agreement yet on this. I talked to the city attorney's office about this.
Okay.
Because, it's the lawsuit is on behalf of her estate, including her minor children. Right. A judge has to approve it.
Yes,
and so they will release a settlement agreement once the judge approves it. So probably in the next couple of weeks or so, we will see that, but we haven't seen it yet.
Okay. I just wanted to point out the overarching issue I have with this. Just the very difficult part about this settlement is it does help the family of Charleena Lyles in many ways. That's a good thing. But does it really lead to change in the way the Seattle Police Department or other police departments work when it comes to these crisis calls? I know that our 911 system right now in the city of Seattle is undergoing some changes. They're trying to be more responsive to these different crisis responses here. But I'm just left with this difficult thought of we're not there yet when it comes to police interaction with, or any sort of interaction on the city's behalf with people in mental health crisis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's more work we need to do. The city is definitely looking at, are there civilian and community-based alternatives that we should be using, right?
Yeah, the Triage One group they've been talking about.
Triage One group, there is a mobile health crisis center already, which, can respond to some of these.
Yes.
Are they at the scale we need them to be? No, not even close. Right. Do we know what it would cost to scale it up? Not really yet. Do we know whether we can source the resources, including trained personnel, to be able to staff something like that 24/7 by 365? A lot of these issues happen late at night. They're not things that happen necessarily at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Right. So, if we believe we know what are better solutions, there's still the whole question of, can we actually resource those appropriately so that the city is provisioned to really use those resources when we need them? And then how do we plug them in the 911 system?
Right.
How does somebody, do our 911 dispatchers, can they tell in advance when a call comes in whether this is going to be a time when they need those? So for example, with Charleena Lyles, right?
Yeah,
she called to report a theft, right? And over the phone, she gave no indication
that she was having a crisis.
She was having a mental health crisis at the moment, right? So, do you send a police officer out or a community service officer out to take a theft report? Or do you send a mental health provider out? Based on a record in the 911 dispatch system saying that there are prior mental health calls. That's a really, really tough question. Right? It's a super tough question, and it's going to take more time and more expertise and a lot of community engagement, community advice and leadership for us to figure out the right way, what is the right thing to do in those kinds of situations.
Absolutely true. And I'm covering the crisis response system for the city of Seattle this week on City Inside Out on Seattle Channel. So make sure you check that out, folks, if you're interested in learning more about this. The civil case with Charleena Lyles is wrapping up here, but the inquest by King County into this death is set to begin early next year. We'll keep track of that. Following up on a story we brought you last week, the Seattle City Council is considering a ton of substantial rule changes, including which council members can participate in the committee process and committee votes that move legislation up to the full council. Can council members participate electronically, even after we get out of pandemic mode, God willing? And should the council move its weekly meeting to Tuesday? And a whole lot more here, including can the council president mute council members who are interrupting and speaking out of order? Kevin, what's standing out to you here?
Well, so there are a couple ones. Certainly COVID has been very strange for this city council, and they are wrestling with the issue of should the official rules, which have been suspended for the last 2 years, say that their meetings need to be in person, and they're only under emergency circumstances, or a case when a city council member has been granted leave that they would get under sort of medical leave or paid parental leave or family leave. Rules for city employees, are they allowed to really participate remotely in these meetings? Right. With the exception of like an emergency meeting, like if a meeting in city council, a special meeting got called under emergency or very short-term circumstances, then just to make sure they can get to a quorum and take care of the city's business. Right.
But would it be allowed?
Under normal circumstances, they're expected to be there in person. And there's good reasons for that, right? It's like, we want our elected officials to show up and be accountable to the public, right? We don't want them hiding in unknown locations, right? But, COVID's changed a lot. Right. There are now public health issues around all this for the council members, for their staff. So, what should the rules be going forward? So they're having some debate about that. There's certainly some members. I haven't heard any in their discussions so far, any of the city council members say that they should go back to where the rules were before, where there's an expectation that everybody should be there in person. Right. So now the question is, under what circumstances can they be remote?
What kind of hybrid are we going to see out of this?
Is it entirely up to the individual council member, or does the chair of a committee or a meeting need to approve it? Right. Does there need to be advance notice? Right. And that's not only for the benefit of the other council members who are going to be in the meeting, but also for all the staff and everybody who has to figure out.
Man, sorry. But also,
okay, we're back again.
Sorry, buddy. But also, staff is where I heard it.
Okay, so it's important for all the staff who need to support taking roll call, need to support technical support for including folks in meetings if they're zooming in from somewhere else, right? And how do you manage it if you've got 8 people in person and 1 person on Zoom? Right. Or 1 person on telephone. It's that can be very complicated, right? How do you officially take votes on those things? Right. So a lot goes into that. So that's one whole big set of issues, and we'll see where they come out on that. There's another issue around when the full regular weekly full council meeting should be. Right now it's Monday afternoon. And what that has meant in practice right now is that a lot of their staff have to work over the weekends to prepare, and not to mention the city council members themselves, who most of them tell you they work full days on Sundays to try to get ready for these final votes. And a lot of that's because not all the council members are in all the committees that the most of the deliberations around. So they all have to basically, once they see on Friday afternoon what is on the agenda for Monday afternoon, then they have to cram to learn about the bills and get ready for them and understand the issues and maybe see if they have any last minute amendments they want to do because they just weren't part of the committee deliberations around it. So that's a bunch of work for them. So they're thinking maybe if it'll be just a good work-life balance thing for their staff and for them, if they can move that regular full council meeting where these final votes happen to Tuesday afternoon or maybe Wednesday morning.
Yeah.
And then move, in turn, move the Monday morning council briefing either to Monday afternoon or maybe
Later in the
Tuesday
day.
morning.
Yeah.
And then, one of the things they're looking at is these council briefings tend to, they particularly in COVID when they're all remote, have turned into basically long scripted speeches, right?
Yes. Yeah. True.
And a lot, there's value to them, particularly since they come right before the full council meetings.
That's
when
right.
It's the last opportunity for the whole council to sort of have some of these deliberations about bills, while there's still maybe time to get a last minute amendment in or something like that, before they actually get into the final deliberation and vote on these things. But so they don't want to get rid of them altogether, but it's like, do we really need to have these every week?
Yeah.
And so there was one suggestion, maybe they should be every other week, but they're probably not going to go in that direction. But right now, the rules say that the council briefing is required every week. And what seems like there was some consensus around is switching that to they may have them.
I see.
Right? So the council president could look at this and say, there's nothing controversial on the full council next week. Yeah. I don't think we need to have a council briefing.
Right.
Get back a couple 3 hours, so
interesting.
Where they don't have to listen to each other give long-winded speeches.
Which they do. I know they do.
Oh yes, they do. Oh yes, they do.
True story.
So this there were a couple other interesting things that were put out there. Well, we'll see what happens. One is Councilmember Strauss. I don't think this is going to go forward, but Councilmember Strauss put forward a proposal that really sort of got misunderstood at first to be, hey, we should add an April recess to our August and December recess. And he said, no, really, that's actually not what I was saying. What I was saying was maybe we should adopt a model which is more like the state legislature,
right?
Which says, let's get out of this sort of, weekly grind of we've got some committee meetings and then we put things in front of the full council and do some committee meetings and put things in front of the whole council. Where instead, let's have like a month or something like that where it's all committee meetings. Then we'll have a full council, right? So we can have multiple committee meetings around an issue, really deliberate things fully, and then get to a final vote on the floor. Right.
Interesting idea.
And and maybe we design that to be multiple legislative cycles over the course of the year, right? We have a winter one, we have a spring one, we have a summer one, we have fall, we have the fall budget season. So, in between, we have a recess that allows, the council members and their staff to go generate, the ideas for the next set of bills that need to go through this whole process.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a big change. There are a lot of people said, that's interesting. I'm guessing it's too big of a change to go there this quickly, but it was intriguing for some of the council members. And then the other sort of area that came up was you could think of it as kind of, a couple of Sawant management, changes. Like
I suppose,
and these really were driven by some incidents that happened really in the last couple of months. Where Councilmember Sawant, interrupted other council members, was talking over council members when the chair jumped in and said, you're out of order. She continued talking over them. And it, came down to an issue of, does the chair have the right to turn off her microphone? Or, let's broaden this, the microphone of any council member who is out of order in a meeting.
That's right.
The rules don't say whether they can go that far to do that. So there may be a clarification on that, and also potentially time limits on how long a council member, because Councilmember Sawant in particular, she's not the only one. Councilmember Muscat also can be pretty long-winded in these meetings. When it's their turn to speak on a pending bill, either in committee or in the full council, they can give a 10+ minute speech. And should that be limited to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, something less?
That would be. I wouldn't mind seeing that, I got to say. And I don't know that council is going to be working on this throughout this week. They're meeting on the 8th of December yet again, taking in some new amendments, it looks like, and hoping to adopt a final version of this on the 13th. So we will definitely keep track of that. All right. And I wanted to say, if you ever wondered what Dua Lipa and the Seattle City Council had in common, they're both talking about new rules. See what I did there? I've been.
Look at you! Look at you doing your thing there.
Yep. All right. Well, we are almost there with the West Seattle Bridge. We're going to talk about this major part of the city's infrastructure in our next segment. What's next? Kevin, I always like to keep tabs on the West Seattle Bridge story because I live in West Seattle, and sometimes just talking about it helps me dream I'll actually see it get reopened someday. It's on target, which is great news. Some important news here actually last week. The formal announcement that SDOT, the Seattle Department of Transportation, had given the notice to
Seattle
proceed
News,
to
Views,
the contractor
and Brews
working
is
on
an
repairs.
independent
These
production
things take
of
time.
Callanan
November
Media
19th
Services.
of 2020,
Copyright
the mayor made the
2021.
call to repair rather than replace the bridge, and now here we are. It appears things are on track so far, Kevin, and there's been so much pressure from not just West Seattle, but a number of surrounding neighborhoods too. I really think there's going to be a major push to get this done in mid-2022 as it's been planned.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not like
Yeah.
nothing is happening
This is
has
true.
happened
A lot of
in
planning's
the
been
last
going on.
year, right?
Yep.
But a lot of planning's been going on, and a lot of stabilization work on the bridge.
That's right. Within the bridge.
You know, there was the initial stabilization work to make sure that like it wasn't an imminent danger of
True.
falling.
Yep,
But then beyond that, once they figured out basically what they had to do
Mhm.
to do that they could actually do a long-term
Yes.
repair as opposed to replacing it.
Right.
And then what that would entail, then they had to go back and look at, do we need to do further stabilization work
Yep.
on this bridge
Yeah.
in order to be able to do the more long-term repair? And they
Yes.
did.
Yeah.
And there were some, you may remember they had to replace some rubber gasket seals
Mhm.
in some of the piers.
Yep.
They had to add some more, cabling inside the bridge.
True.
They had to do some carbon fiber wrapping on the outside. They're
Yeah.
going to do more of all those things
Yeah.
in the major repair that happens between now
Right.
and next summer. But you're right, they're on track, they
Mhm.
believe, to finish this next summer.
Yeah.
So
And-
keep your fingers crossed.
Keep my fingers crossed. Absolutely. Well, thanks for breaking all those pieces down, Kevin. And we always like to wrap up our show with the taste of something nice to have with your coffee on the Coffee Break podcast here. Kevin, I'm back with the terrible, awful chocolate chip cookie that my daughters always make, which they call dumb thick boys. I'm sure they mean it in the nicest way. Yeah.
No editorial comment there.
No. You can see it's kind of like a medium, maybe medium rare in the middle there. You know what's going on right here. Very thick cookie here. It's great on its own, but when I dip it in my tea with honey, as I've been known to do here, it totally revolutionized the experience. I don't mind if I did. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. It just had me thinking, what would you consider the best cookies for dunking in tea or coffee? Any thoughts on that? While I chew.
Well, it depends what you want to. What do you want to taste after?
What do you want to
when you're
achieve out of
eating
this?
the dunk thing, right?
Yeah.
If you really, really like your coffee
Mhm.
or your hot chocolate, right?
Yeah.
Then you want pretty bland. You want bland sugar cookies.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
Or digestives or something like that.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
If it's tea and you don't necessarily want it to really change the flavor, then chocolate chip cookie or peanut butter cookie or something like
That's
that's
the
really
trick.
cool.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
So you got to figure out what is the thing you want to taste.
All right, here we go. These are plans that you have to go through, people, when you're on your coffee
You
break.
have to
This is very
think.
important
You have to
stuff.
think about dunking your cookie in the.
Indeed you do. Indeed you do. Well, thank you for that, Kevin. I always like talking about this with you. Thank you also to our patrons. Thanks to everybody listening out there. It's Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you might listen. Again, please do support our show on Patreon. Always appreciate it. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We will see you soon.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.